When you are asked to sketch a curve, you need to ask yourself 3 questions and prepare before you start sketching. So the first thing that you need to think about is, what do I expect the shape of this graph to be? So if we've got a y equals k times x to the n style graph, it might be slightly more complicated, but if you think about the highest power of x, that's the one to think about. Okay, so if n, that power, is positive and even, so for example x squared would be an example of a positive even power, then if k, which is this number in front of it, is positive, then you know you get this U-shaped. If it's not x squared but x to the power of 4, x to the power of 6, then it tends to be more flatter and less rounded at the bottom. If k in front of it there is negative, then you get more of the N shape that you're familiar with. Now, if n is positive, but it's an odd number, so that would relate to the cubic function. If k is positive, we know it comes up and across this way, as you can see. If it's negative, it comes down and across the other way. If our power is negative, but an even number, and if k is a positive number, then we get this mirror image thing going on, and we expect to have asymptotes. If k is negative, then it's the reflection of that, so it's coming up and over instead of down and across. And then if we have a negative power, which is odd, then we get this kind of opposite effect that you can see here when k is positive. But if k is negative, then again it's that reflection. The other questions that you need to ask yourself is, you need to identify where it's going to cross the x and y axis. To find where it crosses the x axis, we make y equal to 0. To find where it crosses the y axis, we set x equal to 0. And you also need to be aware and think about, are there going to be any asymptotes? Where are they going to be? So here's our first example. So looking at our power of x, we can see what we've got is n is positive and even, and our k is also positive. So we know straight off that we're expecting it to kind of look like this in terms of its shape. Next thing we want to know is, where is it going to cross the axes? So when x equals 0, y will equal minus 16. And when y equals 0, x to the power of 4 will equal 16. And so x will equal plus or minus 2. And this doesn't have an asymptote. So just to do a rough sketch of it here, so if we draw in our xy coordinates, we know that the very bottom of it, in this case, because this is a symmetrical one, is going to go through minus 16 down here. Sometimes it's not quite that straightforward. And we know that it's going to go through plus or minus 2. So it's going to look something like that, where that's minus 2, that's 2, and that's minus 16. So not very well scaled, but you get the idea. So here's our next one. So if we look at this, we can see that n this time is positive, but it's odd. And our k is positive. So what do we know about that? We know that the shape of it is going to be something like this. Now we need to find out where it crosses the axes. So when x equals 0, y equals minus 4. When y equals 0, we're going to have x cubed equals 2. So that would give us x equals the cube root of 2. This again won't have an asymptote, so just having a go at sketching it here. So there is a little bit more difficult there, so you can kind of sort of practice and think about it. So we know it's going to pass through the cube root of 2. So it's only going to pass through in one place because that is going to be a positive answer. If it had been a negative answer, then x cubed would have ended up negative. So it's not a plus or minus job, it is just the 1. So sometimes what I do is I kind of do the rough shape and then I try and fit in where I think the line would go. So we know it crosses y at -4, so we'll worry about that bit in a minute. Now it's only going to cross the x-axis in one place. So I'm going to say that it's probably going to look something like this. So that would be our x-axis and that would be our √3/2. And then it would cross our y-axis down here somewhere at -4. So it's kind of fiddling about, playing with it to get those things, or you can try and work out a few more points at particular values. That can help as well. This one, n is negative and even, and k is negative. So we know from that we're expecting to see this shape of graph. Now let's write this slightly differently and this will help us with working out the other steps now. Okay, so we're going to try and identify if it's going to cross the x and y axis. So if it's going to cross the y axis, we set in x equal to 0. But what you can see is if we put x in as 0 in here, then this term here is going to become infinity. So that's telling us that there is an asymptote here. Now, if y equals 0, then that's going to lead us to 9x to the power of 4 equals 3, x to the power of 4 equals a third, and so x would be the 4th root of a third. Okay, and there would be plus or minus versions of that. So that tells us where it's going to cross the x-axis. Now there's going to be another asymptote. So we found the one that is x equals 0, which goes here, but we should be expecting another one that goes across here. So what we're looking for here is what is going to happen as x tends towards infinity. So as x tends towards infinity, -3 over x to the power of 4 is going to tend towards 0, which means that we will be left with just the +9, and so y equals 9 is the other asymptote that we're looking for. So quick sketch means that we know that it's symmetrical about the y1, and the x-axis would be down here, and it would be coming up and over towards an asymptote here that would be at 9, and these points here would be the plus and minus the 4th root of a third. So here in this last example, we've got a power which is our n, which is negative and odd, and k is positive, and so we're expecting this kind of shape to show up in terms of our picture. So when x equals 0, y will equal 1 to the -3, which is just going to be 1. When y equals 0, we've got 1 over x plus 1 cubed equals 0. And again, that's only going to happen as x tends to infinity, so that means that this is an asymptote. Now there's another asymptote that we're going to have to find here, and so if we think and look about this, the other situation where we're going to come into trouble here will be when x equals -1, because then we'll have 1 divided by 0, and so that is our other asymptote. So if we do our sort of rough axis, so we know that y equals 0, i.e. the x-axis is an asymptote, and also that x equals -1 is an asymptote, and we know broadly what the shape should look like, and it's supposed to go through 1 here, so it will come down and along like this, where that's 1, and then you'll have the other part of it coming in like so.